Hello and welcome to Artist Express. Our guest today is Pam Harris. You've probably seen some of her artwork in gallery shows in the area, and you have probably seen a lot of her design work without realizing you were looking at it with the work that she does with graphic design for various institutions and organizations and businesses in the community. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you, Connie.
Glad to have you. And could you just start by telling us a little bit about how you came to pursue an artistic career?
Okay. My family considered me to be artistic when I was young. I always liked to draw, and I can remember laying underneath the kitchen table or the chairs at the kitchen table that had cardboard underneath the chairs with pencils, drawing all kinds of pictures on those pieces of cardboard under the chairs.
Oh, and a Sistine Chapel.
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm. And as I got older, when I had to think about something to do for a living, there was a course called Commercial and Advertising Art out at what we used to call Salina Votech. And so I took that and learned all about graphic design and how I could make a living at that, still employing some of my artistic sensibilities, but using that to solve problems for clients and people, and I've been very happy doing that for many, many, many years.
I think maybe you and I met right after you had graduated from that course, because I was new at the Salina Arts and Humanities Commission at the time, and one of my tasks was to produce a newsletter. And you came, I called you, I don't remember how I got your name, and you did a drawing for us. You gotta have art.
Yes, it was a Fred Astaire drawing.
Yes.
I still have that
illustration.
Really? Yeah.
I still have my copy of the newsletter.
My mother kept the paper sack that Ashton's printed that on at the time, and she kept that paper bag.
That's wonderful. I love it. Well, you really incorporate expressive art and design art. So could you talk a little bit? Some people make very strict distinctions between the two. And so I would like to hear your take on that, given that they are so closely related and each draws from the other. Can you talk a little bit about whether you yourself make a big distinction between design and fine art, or?
I don't make a big distinction between those two. I understand why some people do, but I've worked best when I have a problem to solve. And so when a client comes to me with a problem, they have a service they want to promote or a new product or something like that, and they need a logo or a brochure or some sort of printed piece, that's a problem that I can solve using design and art principles. And I do much better with that than I do just thinking about fine art and not having anything is possible. That I have, everything is open, I could do anything. And what I end up doing basically is nothing. And so I often set little problems for myself to solve so that I can produce work of my own.
Right.
And that's always very fun for me because it involves lots of research and just lots of various aspects of the creative process.
And wondering, how can I express this concept or idea visually?
Yeah.
So that's a very mind-boggling thing to start with, and I do understand what you mean about if you start with everything, it's just too much. So starting from a slightly a starting point. Just having a starting point
Yeah.
is a good way to work. And I've seen your logos and various designs through the years, and I think you do a beautiful job. Now, I want to mention, just recently, I heard an artist who was giving a lecture say that the only sin in art is the decorative. And I've really thought a lot about that since, because I think it doesn't take into account the fact that sometimes one decorative element can enhance the final design. I'm thinking of architecture in particular. Sometimes there's one element that just really brings everything together. And I am drawn to simple, but do you have a threshold or a specific standard that you use to decide, no, this is too much? You know that old rule that they used to have back in the 50s about jewelry? Put on what you want and then take off one thing before you leave the house. And so I think about that in terms of sometimes it can be too much, but do you have you noticed as you work that you fall back on this works, this doesn't?
Naturally, over the years, I have similar projects come along.
Right.
And because I have to do things in a timely manner,
Right.
there are often times where in my head I will remember, this is what I did for that particular project, and that worked well. How can I adapt that for this project?
Right. Adapt the process, not the design.
Right.
Right. Great.
Well, even adapting the design, even if the layout of the page is exactly the same,
yes.
elements,
The elements are different.
typefaces, color, all of that can be different and make a completely different end product.
Right.
So,
And do you generally find that your clients have some definite ideas, or is it more frequently left in your hands?
it varies with the client. Some clients have very clear ideas about what they want, and some clients just trust me to come up with something that will work. And there's always a desired result, and that's the determining factor whether whether the design has been successful or not.
It's not the route you take, but the end result. Well, we've talked a lot about the design, so can you tell a little bit? I know that you draw inspiration from a number of different sources for your own expressive work. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I'll talk a little bit about the images that I brought for display, which are from the show that I did about 18 months ago. And it came about because I got a song stuck in my head, the song El Paso, the cowboy ballad by Marty Robbins. And I had, at the same time, committed to a show at a local gallery. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And one thing led to another, and I started doing all kinds of pieces that just relate to the lyrics of that song. And at the same time, I keep my eyes open for artists whose work that I like and techniques that I want to try. And so I went to a folder of techniques that I've saved that I wanted to try someday, and just pulled out one right after another of those techniques and applied it to the ideas that I had for this show. So in that case, I set a problem for myself that had parameters. It had to relate to these lyrics. I had specific techniques that I wanted to try. And so that was just very fun because I did all kinds of research about the Marty Robbins, the writer of the song, and about cowboy ballads in general. And so that was a fun project.
And as I recall, that's a very long song.
Yes.
I can remember DJs talking about that.
Yeah, he had to cut a verse out in order for it to play on a mainstream radio at the time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, so you had a lot of material to work with.
I did.
And the storytelling part, I think, it's really
yes, it was really interesting.
And some of the processes that you used, I saw that show, and I remember that you had a combination of two-dimensional and three-dimensional. Some of your pieces employed both in the way they were presented. So, do you have a preference, or do you go with whatever works best for expressing the concept?
Yes, I go with whatever works best. And if I don't know how to do it, then I have to figure out how to do it as part of the process.
Yes. So it may serve you well in the future when you start another show and start with another process. Well, what can you, I'm really curious about this because you have really had a career in art making since you became an adult, really. So many people save their art making for when they're retired because they may have a day job that keeps them from making art. What are you thinking about in terms of in the far future when you retire? Do you think you will be finished with art, or do you think you will be exploring new ways of making art?
I can't really grasp the concept of retirement because I like what I do. I might sort of shift things and maybe do a little more of this or a little less of that, but I think I'll always make things just because That's comes up.
Do.
Yes, every day.
Yes.
I think about how those ideas are going to come out and what I'm going to do with ideas that come into my head. So
now, if someone walked into your living space, not your workspace, but your living space right now, what evidence would they see of your creative bent?
They would see. I renovated my house a couple of years ago, and so I designed all of that. And on the walls in my house, I have art from lots of, I have original art and other art that prints and things like that I've purchased. Some of my own here and there. So you choose on the basis of what I like.
What you like, what speaks to you.
Yeah, but then it's about curating a space on the wall, what goes with what looks good here.
Right.
And I have, every year I've said that I'm going to landscape my yard, and I've not done it. So the new problem that I've set for myself is to design my yard and learn botanical illustration, which I've always had an interest in. And so now, as I design my yard, I'm going to do illustrations of each plant that I select for my yard. That's my new problem to solve.
I like that. Problem solving. That can be just as interesting. In fact, that brings me to, we talk about creativity a lot and we talk about artistic ability and so forth. There are so many ways to be creative that don't involve making art. And so do you run into people who are intimidated by the idea of needing or wanting to create but feeling inadequate when you know that they have some creative ability in other areas?
I don't know, Connie. Nobody comes to mind specifically that feels intimidated. At least I don't. If they're intimidated, I don't know
They're covering it.
Yes,
well.
they're covering it.
Well, I think of people who make clothing and who, as you did, renovate a house and decorate it according to their artistic principles that some people may not have access to, but have an intuitive understanding of. And so that is one of the things that has always struck me, that there are lots and lots of ways to do that. In terms of your, oops, we're almost out of time. I'm sorry, I just noticed. And so we can't continue this conversation now. Do you have a website?
I do. PamelaHarrisDesign.com.
All right. Thank you very much for talking with us today. Remember, you can catch Pam at PamelaHarris.com.
PamelaHarrisDesign.com.
Design.com. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Connie.